miracles never cease. It's Friday morning, around 9ish. Well, it's about 8:30 actually. And there's no wind. It's actually reasonably still for a change. Fingers crossed, touch wood. My God. It was blowing a gale yesterday. It was shocking. I did something rather impetuous and on the fly just before. I actually paid to have to get a DNA test done of my heritage through the company called My Heritage. They've got a special on at the moment. Ended up costing me, when you add all the extras together, about $110 to get a background of my my DNA. I'm interested because I think I've got some Neanderthal DNA, mainly because I've got a bulge in the back of my skull, just a little bulge coming out the rear end, and that is an indication of Neanderthal, possibly Neanderthal DNA having an impact there. My ancestry supposedly, according to my mother, is 50% Scottish, which means I could have a bit of Nordic blood there because there's quite a few invasions and Germanic blood, and a little bit of English and Irish, smaller amount of Irish. We'll see how clear that is. So what happens now is that they'll send a kit out to me, and I've got to give a saliva swab to send it back to them via the mail. Apparently the whole process takes about 3 to 4 weeks. Maybe you can add a week or two because I'm in Cairns. And it's had very good reviews, so we'll just see. It'd just be interesting to see what background I actually have got. Easier than doing a family tree thing, because I tried that and I have no idea what my grandparents, well, I don't know both of their names anyway. I can't remember on my father's side what the names were. I'm not really into that so much. I'm more interested in the genetic stuff, so it'll be interesting to see what comes of that. $110, it seems reasonable. I know that it's never been cheap, but I think it's definitely come down in price as technology improves. I think that's not too bad, so we'll see how it goes. And interesting today, news-wise, it looks as though maybe Victorians aren't impervious to pain, because the latest news was not a news poll, it's actually a poll conducted for the Liberal Party, and so it may even well be biased towards them. But although they need really accurate data, you would think, to see what's going on with the electorate. Or then again, they might use the data to bolster the morale of the troops, because they'd probably be fairly low at the moment, because Labor seems to have a wall up in Victoria, where people, it's just such a woke state now that they seem to have such solid Labor Party support, but people are losing jobs and businesses are going bust, so there's a lot of pressure there. And the actual poll results are quite interesting, because the previous time they were done, I'm not sure when that was, but I got up on screen, and the poll results were in these 5 marginal seats, which are mainly, there's a few sandbelt ones and out into the east in Melbourne. I think there's a Geelong seat, and overall they had a majority for Labor, 53%, to compared to the Liberals 47, I guess. I can't remember, the figures are up on screen again, but that's not important. The important thing is that the latest poll has shown an amazing turnaround, and now we're looking at, for the same 5 seats, the lead is 61 to the Coalition, and I think 37 to Labor, and that's pretty damn devastating, because that's where they need to win seats in those marginals, which are not marginal at all now. So maybe they're super sensitive to these lockdowns. I think some of the working class seats might rebel a bit too, because the police have been really heavy-handed in some of these working class areas of Melbourne, And the ALP's lost touch with the working class in general, so I wouldn't be counting those as definites for Labor either. Maybe things are actually finally happening. Now, two things can occur from this, assuming that the election goes ahead as planned, but with Dan, who knows, then the Labor Party be out in the CEO. We'd probably a landslide, I would think, because all these pressures are building up. Secondly, the Liberal Party, the Labor Party itself might decide that Dan is just too much of a liability and they'll get the knives out, and I think that's probably the more likely of the scenarios. So I don't think we'll see Dan around for much longer. This will just add fuel to the fire, and if the Labor Party sees him as a total dud electorally, they'll get rid of him. There'll be people in the Labor Party who have some sense of understanding about civil liberties who wouldn't be happy anyway. What's disappointing is a lot of these MPs in the upper house were the ones who gave Andrews the extension of the emergency powers, and they're from minor parties like Animal Liberation Party and a number of other parties. I haven't got them all listed, but they're sort of fringy type parties, and they've decided to go with this, and I think that's really, really disappointing. So that's the situation with Victoria. Maybe there's some light at the end of the tunnel, which would be nice. It's amazing, there's no breeze. It's so liberating. I can actually do a video without worrying about the sound being totally corrupted. But the other big story was to do with how Australia compares to Sweden. Now, because there's an academic who's living in Sweden who used to actually be at Queensland University. I wonder if it's the same university that actually promotes the CCP, because there's definitely a uni in Brisbane which has been very pro-Chinese. So I wonder if he's one of those guys. Who knows? I don't trust academics, to be quite frank. But he's living in Sweden, and he's actually bagging the Swedish response to COVID-19. Now, I think that's not a particularly smart move if you're actually living in the place. But he's comparing the figures, and on face value, it appears as if Australia's doing much better than Sweden on a per capita basis. I concede that, but what I don't concede is that he's not taking into account the collateral damage that's happened in Australia with the suicide rates going up, general misery of people during the lockdown that's happening in Victoria in particular. All those things take account of victims of that particular policy. So it's, if you want to take a simplistic look at the figures, yes, you can say it looks as though they're doing better, but you've got to take into account that we're talking about two different countries, two different circumstances. Sweden's much colder than Australia for a start, so I'd say that you'd expect them to have a higher incidence of COVID, although it was in their summer, but of course their summer is nothing like our summer. So I think they'd be more susceptible to getting outbreaks straight away there anyway. The other thing to take into account with Sweden is that they have an area like Malmo, which is really highly concentrated migrant population, and that is where most of the cases took place, from what I can gather. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's one of the reasons that they had a big spike. So you've got to take that into account too, that we don't have those huge enclaves. We don't have a city that's totally taken over pretty well to a migrant enclave. Now and they just weren't following the guidelines. So of course they had a huge spike. So that's something that doesn't occur in Australia. So you've got to compare apples with apples. And the other thing we've got to look at with these figures is what are the trends currently. Now, Australia may have avoided those COVID cases in the past, but that doesn't mean they're not going to avoid them in the future. It may well be that Sweden now is actually showing a huge reduction in cases, and they may have basically kicked the COVID with the herd mentality. We don't know that yet, we need more time. But my point is that just because Australia's ahead of Sweden right now doesn't mean that that's long term going to happen. We could find that we are going to be susceptible to more waves because we've actually suppressed the COVID initially. It might mean that now we may have a something that's metamorphosized into a more virulent strain might hit us here, because we've actually have less people who have got an immunity to it. Time will tell. We don't know yet, and I think an academic not looking at all those factors is a pretty piss poor academic, in my opinion. But that it reinforces my opinion of academia in general currently. A lot of it's more woke than actually looking at the scientific method and taking all factors into account. And I think that's what's happening here. So yes, you can look at the raw figures and say Sweden doesn't appear to be doing that well compared to Australia, but you've got to read between the lines, you've got to look at all the data to get a true indication of what is happening. And for an academic to make such a simplistic conclusion from those headline figures is very, very worrying. I wouldn't want a guy like that teaching me about logical thinking, because I think he's failed the test abysmally. So that's my take on it anyway. So is it any wonder I'm cynical about the social sciences and humanities, where I presume this academic comes from a woke university? Chances are it looks highly likely it's a woke university with CCP connections. So make what you will of all that. Unfortunately, that's not included in that story, but I think that was a news.com story, and that's a cut down version. In the Australian, for instance, if they've read stories in the Australian, there's probably a lot more meat to it, and they may mention those factors that I'm talking about. But we've got to look at the overall picture, not just go for sensationalistic headlines, which the mainstream media are great at, but they're very piss poor generally at looking at all the details. So that's my take on it. Tell me what you think, give me feedback, thumbs up, thumbs down, kudos, paphos, what the hell am I talking about? Yeah, give me, I got a few extra subscribers, so thank you very much for that, and the more the merrier. Keep subscribing if you like the content that I'm providing.